Often on this show, I talk about how they laugh at us, that they expect that our role in society is to shut up and just pay your taxes, turn up every 3 years and fall for the lie that one side is different than the other. But above all on this show, I try to talk about how they spend other people's money. The they is government, the they is the bureaucracy, the people who carve up the responsibilities that the rest of us have to live underneath. And as we've spoken about on multiple days across this week, there was, of course, the biggest pay rise in a decade for politicians, no productivity linked to that whatsoever. Then there was the biggest pay rise for public servants in a decade, no productivity linked to that. And a specific example of where some real money is being piddled up against the wall, and that is in state government, particularly in the useless Queensland government. The Queensland Labor government that has been there for almost every of the past 35 years, with the exception of the Newman 3 years. The Labor Party is so inextricably linked with the public purse in Queensland that every now and then they just can't help themselves taking the proverbial. I talk about this and other people's money at the start of the show because in a time of cost of living crisis and a time when the population has not boomed by 10% since last year. There's not an extra 15 million people since the Palaszczuk government first came to power. No, just government ever so slowly encroaches. It grows to a point in time when eventually you get to where Victoria is right now, where essentially the view of the state government there is that you either work for the government, as a citizen you are dependent on the government when it comes to a handout. If you're in private business, you service the government, and the third of Victorians, or in this case Queenslanders, who are out there on their own, who don't need government, well, they don't care what you think, which is why they can ignore you during the COVID lockdowns. It's why they can often ignore you when it comes to the social changes that they are making. And a perfect example of just how this works is how much money is being spent on the people who surround the ministers to continue to make the bad decisions that are bad for us, the public, but are always good for government because government always ends up winning. In the Courier Mail today, a huge explosion, tens of millions of dollars, which are currently being spent in and around the wages of the people who advise or immediately work for, not the whole departments, just the very small but increasingly large offices around the people who work for these ministers. Latest ministerial expenditure report reveals that taxpayers forked out $32 million on salaries and related payments for ministerial officers in the year 22-23. That's up from 12%. That's up by 12% from the year before. Total costs of all ministerial officers during that year was $53 million, which is about $6 million more than was spent in 2021-22. So we are now in a scenario where, in the immediate post-COVID period, which bloomed, we're still growing from there. How much money is being spent on advising these people to make the same decisions that get government bigger? Well, about $9 million of it, almost $10 million, are for the people who work for the Premier. $3.9 million for the people who work for the idiot Deputy Premier. 3.2 million people who work for the hapless Treasurer who didn't even know that his Premier was going off on holidays, when we all learned about that this week. The Attorney General, who used to be the Health Minister. The hapless Yvette Darth, $2.9 million. The Education Minister, who was presided over a falling, an endless and precipitous falling of education standards in Queensland. Oh no, but quick, re-elect her, she's a good Sheila. $2.7 million. Mark Bailey, the Transport Minister, $2.7 million. Slick Mick, the Energy Minister, $2.6 million. The current Health Minister, but former Attorney General and most likely to be next Premier if Stephen Miles doesn't get his way, $2.5 million.